All right, welcome to the Liberty Weekly podcast. And I know what you're thinking to yourself. That's not Patrick's voice. Whose voice is that? May sound familiar to you. My name is Trey from the Subversion podcast, and I am guest hosting the second installment of the Wild Wild Country series with the Actual Anarchy boys. Daniel, Robert, how you guys doing?
Doing great. Thank you for guest hosting on the spot. We've been doing this series only one time so far, and the intention is to do all 6 episodes. But Pat, of course, is in the middle of studying profusely for the bar exam, and so I'm very happy you're able to step in. The guest host from the Subversion webcast, also part of the Libertarian Union, as are we, as is Pat, and you can find more of the other shows as well as ours at libertarianunion.com. Robert, let you chime in as well.
Hey, everybody. It's Robert here from the Actual Anarchy Podcast. Thanks for having me on. Excited to do episode 2 of the Wild Wild Country.
Right on. I'm kind of excited that you guys brought me on. I didn't think I would have all that much time this weekend, but we ended up working it out time-wise. And it's a really good series. I like the direction that it's going. Because, you know, the Netflix series and documentaries can kind of be, shall we say, politically biased. So it can be kind of interesting to find one that, you know, you can at least watch without being distracted by the ideology half the time. Because, you know, half the documentaries on Netflix are Hitler documentaries and now becoming Trump documentaries. So
wait, those aren't the same?
Speaking of which, have you guys watched the Vietnam documentary, the Ken Burns documentary yet?
Yeah, I just finished it up. Have you gotten into that?
Well, I've gotten to like episode 3, and I think they're, you know, for the most part, I'm glad that they're taking sort of a stance that the Vietnam War was, you know, illegitimate, but they certainly skirt around the issue a little bit from a fundamental anti-war stance. But, you know, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. It's better than the Cold War era rhetoric about it. So that's all.
Yeah, they are. I mean, the Vietnam War remains a very unpopular war even today.
Yeah.
And it's only gotten more and more unpopular as the information has come out. I thought it was interesting because I didn't know the old history. I thought the very first couple episodes were the most interesting, because you had that whole, you know, Ho Chi Minh becoming a communist and really reaching out and studying abroad and allying himself with, you know, Russia and China and that sort of thing. But in the early days, the United States was one of his supporters.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. And it's kind of funny, the Viet Minh were communists, but they were like pro-America because America was materially supporting them. So I didn't know that bit of history either. So yeah, even with the narrative being probably not what I would want, not as detailed as far as the failures of the West during that war, but yeah, I mean, there's a certain kind of honesty to it that I appreciated. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. He kind of glosses over the Gulf of Tonkin episode, which is essentially the event that, you know, really launched the war for America. And that has, as far as I understand it, that has been admitted to be essentially a false event.
We've got the documents.
Well, no, it's not necessarily. I mean, Jones was saying it for years and years and years, but that came out, I want to say, around the mid-2000s that the State Department or the Pentagon came out and admitted.
Yeah, I want to say
that was a fake event.
McNamara admitted it in that documentary that came out probably 10 years ago now. What was that called? It was
The Fog of War?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think that's the one.
Well, maybe at some point, I've been thinking about doing a series on that one, and I'm still trying to dream up a way to do that. So maybe at some point we can revisit that. but we're talking about the second installment of Wild Wild Country today. And I'd like to just sort of recap, or just kind of go over and give my thoughts, my initial impressions on the documentary so far, and the event. And I think my first thing the first thought that occurred to me was, how hadn't I heard about this? Because it seems like it's almost more, I don't know, it's more grandiose, or it seems like a bigger event even than Waco, as far as like the sheer size of the group that was there, and the controversy that went on there. So I guess I'm just sort of surprised that we hadn't heard about this before this documentary. So what are your guys' thoughts on that? How it was sort of swept under the rug in American history?
Yeah, I'll wholeheartedly agree with you. We, I think, touched on that in the first episode in this series, which was libertyweekly.net/83, and this one will be libertyweekly.net/84, and the whole series can be found at libertyweekly.net/WWC. Just want to throw that out there while we're still getting going here. But yeah, I mean, even though Robert and I grew up just one state away, or, we're bordering on Oregon, we had never heard of this, and this should have been like a big deal, especially around here, because it was geographically close. Now, in the series, they show news clips of national news and also local news saying, how this was all going on. And I think even there was some talk show talking about it, Johnny Carson, right? And a few others. So it seems like it was in the public eye for a very short period of time, but then it went down the memory hole. What are your thoughts, Robert?
Yeah, it seemed like this is another one of those 24-hour news cycle things before that really is a thing, where it was a big deal for a while. And what are the latest events in the Sannyasin saga? And then as soon as the Bhagwan, spoilers, essentially, is arrested and he leaves, then it's on to the next thing. And it's down the memory hole, like you said, Daniel. So yeah, it was interesting to revisit this and to find out that it was a really big deal, and then to revisit it as a, like a libertarian, and to see all of these themes that are kind of pretty hot right now, like with the culture and like the immigration and that sort of thing, really kind of coming to a head, where there's this conflict between all these immigrants and these natives, and there's a real culture clash, and who's got the right? It's an interesting story.
Yeah, for sure. Very captivating story too, I think. And yeah, I think you're right. It's a good event to explore as libertarians, and especially if we can glean it into the problems we're having now, and just how identitarians probably think about it. I'm actually kind of curious. I can probably guess what identitarians think about this, but I think you'd have to set aside your libertarian principles to think that that these people should have been ousted from property that they justly bought. I mean, it opens up a lot of questions about the state and culture and where those two intersect and compete with each other. So yeah, I guess if just to get right down to it, this episode sort of details their quote unquote invasion into the town, which they were sort of pressed into legally. And when they started to go use the post office and things like that, started buying property in the town, that's when things really started to clash from a state perspective. So yeah, and you guys kind of went over a lot of this from the beginning. So I guess we can't, we don't really want to hash it out too much, but this had started to become a pretty powerful group by this time. It seems that, and you guys touched on this in the first episode too, but that they were actually producing goods. Now, the one thing I really thought was missing, and this is probably just I'm a minority in that I may be one of the few people who's actually asking for this kind of information, but I'm sort of curious about the economics of this group, because OSHA, whatever you want to call him, Rajneesh, is not necessarily anti-capitalistic, and he goes to great lengths to denounce socialism. At least when he was in India, it seems that he was denouncing socialism and observing the problem with the other communist groups that had been going on at the time, that their main fault was that they didn't think that they needed to produce wealth, whereas Rajneesh sort of embodied this socialistic kind of mentality and sentiment, but under this under the idea that being productive isn't necessarily evil. So yeah, I guess, what are your guys' thoughts on, I'll start with you, Daniel, on how they melded capitalistic and socialistic, and Rajneesh is sort of hostile towards both in a way, in an ideological way. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
I think you're spot on, and I almost want to say that this is part of that socialist outlook, in that, well, as long as the capitalist structure exists and is oppressing me, I need to accept my paycheck. We can't abolish money yet. I have to survive within the confines of the existing society. So I think there was a blue checkmark Twitter person who's a trans person. I don't know how to officially say it correctly, but they were going after Elon Musk, saying that being a billionaire is an evil thing and should be considered a derogatory term, and that Elon could do so much more and better for people in the world if he just gave his money away. Well, if you do the math, if he gave his money away to the people in the world, everyone would get $1. All right, so that doesn't really help. And Elon actually responded to this person and said, well, I've created 50,000 jobs, accomplished all of these things, and basically said that, he got this money by providing value. Now, I think that there's a lot of question about whether some of that is due to his cozy crony relationship with government and subsidies and things like that. But no, the fact remains, he's actually providing value by utilizing that capital in an effective and productive way. And the irony of this whole situation is that the description of the person, the blue checkmark trans person, is while she is denouncing capitalism, the little tagline under there says, "For $10, get nudes of me."
Yeah, I saw that. That was hilarious.
And somebody called them on that, and their response was, well, I still need to earn money while we still have these capitalist oppressors. So in my mind, that's sort of a long-winded way of saying that might be how Osho, Rajneesh, is sort of viewing his situation, right? He's seen other communes, other intentional communities fail, and he's like, okay, well, if socialism on the local scale might be functional, in the broader world, you still need to have money to be able to survive in the society. So I think he was sort of merging the two, saying, okay, on the small scale of our community, the sannyasins in this ranch in Rajneeshpuram, we can be socialist in our planning and our structure and how we organize ourselves. But we also need to produce goods that are valued outside of our community to bring money in. Is that kind of your take, Robert?
Well, just to expand on that first thing you said with Musk, I just want to add that he would do, like you said, I mean, if he's going to divide up his money, everybody would get $1. And what good would that really do? If he can develop with that concentrated amount of wealth, a piece of technology, a new product that people really can't live without, like, he develops something that improves everybody's life, he's going to do far more for the poor of the world or for everybody in the world than if he had just spread out his money random, some even distribution. So you're absolutely right about that. Now, in terms of the Bhagwan, I didn't get the sense that they were selling their goods outside the commune. They were definitely selling their goods within the commune. They had pizza places. They had a shop that sold like orange and red clothes. They had, various little things like that. But I didn't get, so I think it was kind of one of those communes that depends on, the outside money. And I think those are very common, where, you basically give all your money to the group and then they kind of take care of you. But it also didn't seem like, other kind of, I guess, the slur cult gets thrown at them a lot, but I didn't really see them so much as a cult, in the sense that it seemed like people, they had jobs, they had professions, they would add their skills and abilities to the group, and they may leave, and then they may come back. It didn't seem like, you must come in, you must give all your money to us, and then, we'll live in this little happy commune thing. So I wasn't exactly sure on the economics of it, but it was evidently working, very well for the Bhagwan. I mean, he was incredibly wealthy, and the sannyasins were all doing quite well. They didn't get into the nitty-gritties of, every single person, how well are they doing? Because I guess you couldn't. It wasn't really their story. So, yeah, I was a little bit confused. It's a little unclear about the exact economic situation. But, I mean, that embracing of capitalism and embracing of the human creative spirit to produce is a key insight that gets ignored by a lot of these commune type peoples.
Yeah, I have a short rejoinder before, Trey, you can take us wherever you want to go after. There was a scene, and I don't recall if it was in either of these first two episodes, but where they were treating the Bhagwan and his teachings as a business, and there were books and like trinkets and things that they were selling out to followers the world over. So not just within the commune itself on the ranch, but followers around the world. So I think that they were selling goods out into beyond the confines of the commune, maybe not outside the confines of the teachings or the followers, but there were lots of followers around the world.
Yeah, and I mean that's just a question for kind of economic junkies like ourselves. Like, hey, how did these people sustain themselves? And I think a large percentage of the wealth that built this community and that sustained it for so long was just sort of living on the trust fund of these people who participated. Because it seems like, I mean, they had some people from very wealthy professions, if you will, engineers and civil engineers and people who probably did pretty well for themselves before they joined this group or cult, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I'd like to maybe dwell on the ideology here just a little bit of this group and maybe more specifically what was coming from the top from Rajneesh. And I think maybe here's a good place. Daniel had mentioned sannyasa. And I think me and Daniel are talking about this before we hit record. Maybe it's worth just bringing up. But sannyasa is not a specific name, a name specific to this group. That's what they call themselves. But I guess it's and I don't fully understand this concept quite yet, but it's a general term for the life cycle of certain people in Hindu philosophy. So sannyasa is one of 4 life cycles that people can have. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce some of these other ones, but a sannyasa is, well, I'll get to that last. So the 3 groups are like bachelor students, householders, and like forest dweller people. And I don't know, should I go on that tangent about what I think these people are, Daniel?
Yeah, because I think it is relevant to the discussion, right?
Okay. So these forest dweller people, I have a friend who had backpacked in the Himalayas, and he said there were these people who when they got older and they didn't have a family to tend to anymore, they would just kind of go off alone, and a lot of them will hang out in graveyards and like they're doing rituals for the dead, I guess, and they just like sit around and smoke a bunch of hash and just sort of kind of let loose the end of their life and really embrace this freedom of the end of their life. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting, and that's just one of the groups of these 4 life cycles. But sannyasas specifically are people who renounce their material desires and prejudices, and sort of have a disinterest in material life. However, that sort of contrasts with the actual ideology of this group of people, because they are actually kind of materialistic. I mean, even in this visceral sense of like physical pleasure, they're sort of hedonists, you know. But they call themselves sannyasas, which is sort of like a little bit of conflict in terms. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how this guy, he uses this anti-capitalist rhetoric to sort of get people to embrace this sort of different way of organizing society, right? But at the same time, he's like, but we can take these good things from Western society, like, you know, embracing sexuality, which is not traditionally a Western thing, but, you know, as compared to the East at the time, you know, the counterculture in America was something that it seemed like he wanted to embrace, and was sort of channeling this new age era that they were almost a part of the vanguard of perpetuating.
Yeah, if I could jump in for just a second. Earlier when we were talking about sannyasins, I think you described it as the awakened people, and that's what the followers of the Bhagwan would consider themselves. So in a general sense, in the Hindu philosophy, they were referred to as sannyasins, not because of being specific to Bhagwan and Rajneesh, etc. And so, yeah, they're the awakened people, the followers of the Bhagwan.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, I think that's a lot more concise way of putting what I was trying to get at. I'm trying to like get nitty gritty in here and sort of pick apart their ideology. And that's the weird thing about this group, is you can't really pin it down. It was sort of a product of its era in a way, you know. Within this episode, you see the hostility from the surrounding community, and they consider them sort of a product of communism, almost. Maybe not deeply, and maybe they don't understand it quite all the way, but you know, they were graffitiing like "Red is dead" or something like that. And maybe that's just because the people wore red. But I have a feeling, because this was in the era that it was in, at the tail end of the Cold War, that there was certainly like this hypochondria to communism, you know, within the community. Do you think I'm spot on with that analysis, Robert, or what would you add?
Well, you're probably right. There are some lingering feelings, and this is actually, yeah, you're right, at the end of the Cold War. So, and at the time, we had no idea how long the Cold War would last. I mean, this is the time of like Donald Rumsfeld and the other neocons really touting up the power of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, they were basically inventing armies and weapons and caches that didn't exist, just to, you know, hype up the threat of Russia to continue to sell, you know, weapons and buy weapons here. But the threat of the big threat that the documentary plays up is the link with the Jim Jones cult and the threat of a mass suicide. So, and that really struck me as just a complete slandering. Like they had no understanding of who they were or what they were about. They didn't want to take the time to understand them, to read any of his books or anything like that. And they also didn't want to admit that Jim Jones was a Christian and that this group wasn't at all Christian. I mean, they were taking some kind of capitalistic values, but yeah, you can't necessarily link Christianity with capitalism in a really meaningful sense. I mean, we could get into that discussion if you want, but I mean, that whole thing is really murky anyway. So I thought it was a really unfair labeling, and the sannyasins really bristled at that labeling. And they, Sheila really went on TV and really kind of, defended themselves against it, and rightfully so. Because, I mean, first of all, I don't even know if, has every like doomsday cult in history that all believes in like killing themselves and jumping on board? I mean, that isn't like the Comet. There's the one Comet cult. I don't know if they were Christian or not, but certainly Koresh was, and then not that he wanted to die. And we could talk about Waco, that's for sure. But I don't know if there's ever been a sannyasin death cult in history. So I think that was a case of the U.S. media and the U.S. people just kind of really trying to struggle to get their heads around, or not even wanting to understand them and just dismiss them as, oh no, what if this is just another big suicide cult?
Well, and there is a loose connection to Jonestown. Did you guys catch that the daughter of a senator who was killed while he was visiting the Jonestown compound, his name's Leo Ryan, his daughter actually took the life insurance money from his death and presumably worked it into the Rajneesh group. So there's sort of this loose affiliation from the fallout of Jonestown within this. So it's sort of like,
well,
yeah,
but
we're
if
coming
anything,
right out of that era. So,
but if anything, that should be a refutation of it. Like, here's a girl who lost her father to a suicide cult. So now she's involved in a different thing. Don't you think that she would not want to be involved in a suicide cult?
Right, and it's obvious when you see when she's being interviewed that she certainly doesn't believe that this is anything like Jonestown, and I think that's correct. I don't think that it's wise to compare a group like this to Jonestown. I mean, yeah, that's just the bottom line. There are a lot of similarities with groups like this, but you know, it's not a monolith. You can't just say because something happened this way that it's going to end the same way. So yeah, I think I agree with that.
I think it might have been a media convenience, right? Because Jonestown had recently occurred and was top of mind for the mass consuming public, right? And so that was the closest similar thing that they could use to put the meat on the bones, so to speak, when they were presenting this on the nightly news.
Right, in a very lazy way, in a way of like, oh no, here's another one.
Yeah, exactly.
Not in any way to actually understand them.
Exactly.
All right. So within this episode too, we sort of get a scope of, you know, the regardless of what we know about the specifics of the economics here, these people had plenty of money, right? They bought a ranch that, in terms of actual like acreage, is what did they say? It's as big as Manhattan and Brooklyn combined. Like just a massive area of land. So
yeah, it's actually 63,000 acres or 100 square miles is what the documentary said.
Yeah, I mean, just insane, an insane amount of land. So people took the fact that the land was so huge, that they would have all this privacy, and who knows what kind of satanic things are going on there. And it even within the in the documentary, they show clips of the news reporting at the time, and they were going as far as saying that these people were satanistic, when I think this is at an era during a time when the Satanic Panic was kind of going on. I want to say during the 80s, there was that one Christian guy who was making a documentary where he was showing like how rock and roll music is satanic and it's corrupting our youth and things like that. So,
yeah, and this is the time of the televangelist where like Jerry Falwell and other people were really railing against any kind of counterculture type stuff. Yeah, like heavy metal music and that kind of crap.
Yeah, so we see in this episode that the sheer size of the compound that these people are trying to build, and then when things really start to get a little wild is when some footage comes out within the cult or within the group, and it shows them, doing their strange meditation practices of some odd combination of what do you call it? Kundalini yoga, where you do the crazy in out breaths really fast, combined with tantric yoga, I guess. So, and to anybody on the outside, this looks pretty crazy. And I mean, I think even myself, when I'm watching this, I'm kind of thinking like, oh man, how much of this was like consensual, because there's a lot of sex stuff going on that, who knows, how comfortable people were in some of these situations. I don't know. It just seems like I can see how people would get a little taken back by it and be like, oh, we can't have these weirdos at our outskirts. So anyway, turning back to you, Daniel, what are your thoughts on my little run out there?
I like where we're going with this, but we've already been about a half an hour in, and I know we want to keep these a little bit short. So I'm wondering if we could direct this more towards the beginning of episode 2 of the series, because you talked about they adopted some of the Western capitalistic ideas for running their commune. Well, they also sought out the protections or supposed protections offered in the West to be able to set up the commune to begin with, and also the fundamental right of self-government and home rule and being able to create their own city with 150 people intending to do so. And they open episode 2 with the prosecutor, who basically says he's doing God's work and that they started keeping this massive file, thousands of documents related to felonies that were because Sheila and the Bhagwan were moving people from Pune to the United States. And he also talked about how he got the luxury, the trial lawyer, prosecutor guy, of being the best trial lawyer he could be. And to me, that was a misallocation. Like that was a luxury afforded to him because of the monopoly in justice by the government. So he could very narrowly focus and specialize in becoming the most effective violator of people's rights because he didn't have to focus on anything else. And that shows me that he's going to be overwhelmingly more knowledgeable of the system, which thus requires anyone defending themselves to go and get the best and most expensive defense lawyers that they can get. So it takes the realm of justice outside of the common man, and it gets into the whole concept of very specific language and legalese and needing to have this almost arms race within the scope of having a trial and having justice. And so I just wanted to throw that out there as sort of maybe the last topic to discuss before we wind this one down.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And yeah, I think I would agree that I mean, opening with the prosecutor, he's I think one of the last lines before they get into the introduction of episode 2 is he just says something about how these people are just simply evil, and that is what was motivating them, that it wasn't greed, that it was evil. So I mean, right off the bat, the guy shows his blatant contempt, and that he's not necessarily interested in property disputes and actually resolving this conflict, but he wants to destroy these people. And maybe that's just his perception retroactively from what happened there after the initial conflict. And by the way, I'm not even super familiar with this story. I'm kind of watching the documentary and learning as I go about the events. I know that at some point they engage in some kind of bio attack of some kind. But at this point in the story, I don't know that these people actually violated any property rights. They were simply buying property. And
doing so defensively, right? Because they wanted to build buildings on their land, but then they weren't allowed to unless they incorporated. So then they incorporated. And then the county was trying to shut them down because they didn't want them to build their buildings. So then they tried to disband the town. So then they went down to Antelope and bought property to become a majority voter so that they could then use Antelope's ability to issue building permits. And so it was always an escalation by government and the people of the town trying to utilize government to thwart the Rajneeshis or the Sannyasins. And the Sannyasins would respond in kind. Okay, well, if you want to use democratic means, fine. We'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah, right. And I mean, it's kind of funny. They say that these people, one guy laments that, one day someone will be sitting on their porch with a shotgun and saying they'll never sell to these people. And then the next day they've got a trailer packed with stuff and a $50,000 check and they're out of town. So, I mean, sort of an interesting conundrum for these people, I would imagine. These people who are probably rather conservative, probably don't really like what's going on here. So when the opportunity is afforded to, individuals, it's obvious that their preference is to get the hell out of this ghost town where all this craziness is going on and take the money and run. So Robert, would you blame these people for doing that in that situation? Or would you support them standing there and standing their ground?
We're talking about the Antelopians here?
Yeah.
I have a very low opinion of the Antelopians. I don't have a lot of sympathy for someone who, just because they don't like, like the way their town is changing or the way that their neighbors are acting, that they're going to go and use government to violently force these people to leave or anything like that. I thought it was interesting in the show, and this is a thing I really want to delve into in a way, is that the prosecutor, he seemed to be, judging the Rajneeshis as a whole. Like, they take this snapshot, like, with the benefit of hindsight, wow, these people are so evil because of these attacks that the sannyasins carried out in later episodes. And they don't see, how it was all escalated and how they were the ones that instigated it all. It seemed to be that the main complaint, and it kind of gets repeated throughout, of the sannyasins is that they're evil. But it's very non-specific. What does that mean? They're evil. These people are just evil, and that's just a kind of a blanket slur you can throw on somebody without actually explaining why or how, what specific action that they carried out is evil. I want to know. And what several of the townspeople complained of, and I have a direct quote here that I wrote down, they seem to be complaining mostly about that their quiet life was destroyed, that, there's a lot of activity in the town now. Oh no, our sleepy little ghost town is like getting developed. That's the worst thing ever. And then another person complains that, they're talking about free love, and they claim that this is the downfall of civilization. And I think that's a really interesting claim to make. it seemed to me that they were a bunch of prudes who weren't getting any, and here are all these people that were getting it on, and they really objected to that. And they seem to say that, well, this is the breakdown of the family unit, and that could be somewhat true. I mean, but who gets to say, what is the optimal size and scope of what constitutes a family? Now, in human history, it sure seems to be that, a single, two parents and a bunch of children seems to be the best cohesive unit of what a family is. And here comes along the Bhagwan, and he's got this whole kind of free love commune, and everybody's taking care of everybody else. And it's kind of replicating what a village is, and kind of what in the past of what people did. There's this saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And that's kind of what used to happen around these whole human history. And nowadays, we kind of segregate ourselves into these little households where it's the mom and dad taking care of the kids. And then, that's their job, and they don't want to outsource it to anybody else. So what exactly is it that the local people are really objecting to? What is really evil? And can we agree with them on any level? Can we say that, yeah, this breakdown of the family unit or the changing of the family unit is what's evil? Is it the free love that's evil? Because, these days, I hate to break this down to you, but love isn't free. It's an exchange of resources. The male provides generally the resources, and the female provides the eggs and the babies. And that's kind of how these family units work. So I wouldn't say that it is free. So then they come along and say that, hey, it's all free and we're not going to, have any obligations or whatever. And maybe that's what's evil. I tend to think not, but yeah, you're definitely right in that they're conservative and they want to hold on to the culture that they have. Any thoughts on what that big giant word salad, Daniel?
Well, I think we will need to start winding this down, but I think it ties into the whole concept that will bring this all together, and that is their outlook in running a society based on love and compassion and sharing instead of ownership, greed, and anger. That's what their lawyer guy said. I forget his name, but he's got like a sannyasini name, and I think that your concept of they're just evil simply means the Antilopians don't have any specific complaints other than, well, I mean, they have a couple of minor specific complaints. Like one of the people was saying, well, we could hear them having sex, across the town, and we couldn't have our windows open or something like that. But I think it was mostly just, we don't like them, so we're going to use whatever means we can to get rid of them. And it seemed to be the approach that the prosecutor at the opening was talking about as well. He was taking a pre-judgment and saying, okay, I'm going to look for as much dirt as possible. We're going to compile as much negative information on these people as possible. And we're going to use whatever laws and means we have available to us, even if we have to modify them or reinterpret them or go against their original intent to achieve our ends of getting them out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I suppose just to wrap it up, the episode ends with, and I didn't quite catch exactly what was going on here, but one of their apartment buildings, one of the Rajneesh's apartment buildings got blown up, and it wasn't clear to me exactly who did that yet. Unless I missed something, they didn't give any indication as to what caused that or who did that, right? Or do we even know yet?
Well, it was a hotel in Portland that they owned and operated, and that a lot of the Rajneeshis stayed at, but it was also open to the public. And they didn't name a specific person, but they did identify that there was a single man and that he had certain behaviors that they think that's who it was.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't say if it was like native Oregonians, or if it was one of the Rajneesh themselves, maybe pulling a false flag of some kind. I didn't get any indication of the intentions of the person who did it. But suffice to say that violence was fomenting in this. This had gone past just harassment, because at some point when they did start coming into the town, the behavior of both the Antilopians and the Rajneesh or sannyasins were pretty hostile towards each other. Like the sannyasins were like going around videotaping people, shining spotlights into their house and stuff like that. So, I mean, unless you really want to define who started it, both of these people are kind of at fault for, fomenting this. But essentially, you see the entire episode ends with a shot where Osho had just gotten done doing some sort of speech, and then is going back to the green room or whatever you want to call it, and these guys with high capacity rifles start following behind him. So they are prepared for violence, and especially violence against their leader at this point. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of ominous as to the future of what's going to happen with these people and with this town. So I'm assuming things are going to get pretty intense as far as confrontation goes here within the series. So
things are certainly brewing, and it's escalation upon escalation in kind, So it does get pretty interesting, and I think we'll dive into that a little bit more in the next episode, which I think Pat is still not going to be available, so we're going to probably do guest hosting duties with Tony of Don't Waste Your Hate for episode 3, and then Pat will be back for 4, 5, and 6. And then I think we also have a potential guest who was in a quote-unquote cult for over 25 years to come on and talk with us on one of our later episodes. So that should be a really interesting treat.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I guess I just want to tell people thank you for listening to this installment of Liberty Weekly's covering of the Wild Wild Country series. Again, my name's Trey with the Subversion Webcast. You can find it at subversionwebcast.com, or just search Subversion anywhere on your podcatcher of choice. And thanks to the boys from Actual Anarchy / Last Nighters for diving into this with me. It's been real fun, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And if anyone's interested in our shows, we have our most recent episode is The King's Speech, and that is episode 85 of the show, and that's actualanarchy.com/85 or lastnighter.com/28. The episode after that is going to be on the Mission Impossible franchise, because the newest installment is coming out on Friday the 27th, called Mission Impossible Fallout. And so we thought we'd ride the wave of the excitement in the news cycle or the media cycle for that one. And then I'll just turn it over to Robert before we say goodnight.
Well, thanks for having me on here for this second installment of the Wild Wild Country. The series only gets wilder from here. There are parallels to other events in American history, and it just gets really, really interesting. So if you haven't seen the whole series, check it out and join us back for episode 3.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, and show notes and more, libertyweekly.net/84, and the whole series, libertyweekly.net/WWC. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Trey, for being the guest host. It was amazing.
You betcha.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.